I sat down, I had a migraine and I was procrastinating, a bad headache, and I was on Twitter, as it was called then, and people were having a debate as to whether they needed love or respect, and they were referring to the book Love and Respect.
Mhm.
And I thought, I have that book. This is a great way to procrastinate. So I got it and I read it, and it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my living room because I realized for the first time what was being taught and how it was only part of a message, and it was really leaving out what was going on in women's hearts and women's lives. And I thought, we
Yeah.
need to do better than this. We need to do
Mm.
better than this. And that's what changed the whole focus of what, because I stopped just writing books based on, my opinion, the Bible, and what I was reading in peer-reviewed literature. And we started doing our own surveys. And so we've
Mm.
done the largest studies of evangelical women's marital and sexual satisfaction that have ever been done.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me here for another episode at Java with Jen. Today, we are going to talk about marriage and a little bit about sex. Yes, we are. It's going to be exciting. So, I have Sheila Gregoire with me, who she and her husband have a marriage ministry together. But the book that we're going to be diving into is one of her newer books called The Marriage You Want. And when I saw that title, I was like, ooh, that sounds really good. And so, we've talked a little bit, and I'm excited about the good stuff she's going to bring. But let me explain who she is just a little bit. She's from way up in Toronto, and she is the face behind baremarriage.com, as well as a sought after speaker and an award winning author of 9 books, including The Great Sex Rescue and She Deserves Better. With her humorous, no nonsense approach, Sheila is passionate about changing the evangelical conversation about sex and marriage to make it healthy, evidence based, and biblical. She and her husband Keith live in Ontario, Canada. I said Toronto, I meant Ontario, near their 2 adult daughters and 3 grandbabies. She also likes to knit, even in line at the grocery store. You sound
Yeah.
like you could get along with my sister really well. So thanks, Sheila, for joining me.
Yeah, it's so fun to be here.
Absolutely. So the topic, obviously, I could already tell when looking at your content, even I could tell like you seem like you guys have a lot of fun and that you have a good sense of
Mhm.
humor just from the pictures, from the titles, from the topics of your books and stuff. So tell me a little bit about yourself, something that maybe the general public doesn't really know that makes you guys unique in this space.
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, we are Canadian, eh? So that's often very different. But I think one of the biggest things is we're doing this as a family, and that wasn't really intentional.
Mhm.
My husband's a doctor, and so he was busy with his medical practice. I started blogging and writing, and then as I got bigger, when my daughter graduated from university, she started working for me. And then we started our huge research projects. And so now I write books about sex with my daughter, and we're always doing this podcast where we're talking about sex, which most people would find that weird, but for some reason it isn't
That's
with us.
great.
And then my husband's off and on too, and now we're doing this marriage book together. And he's really cut back on his medical practice and
Wow.
come over to help me with what I'm doing. So it's really fun where God's leading us.
No kidding. How many years have you been doing all this?
Well, I started blogging back in 2008, and then our big research-based books were first written in 2020. So
Wow. That's
yeah,
incredible.
and
Okay,
with the
so
five books in the last 4 years. So yeah,
that's
a lot.
amazing. 9 books is a
Hmm.
lot. I just launched my
Hmm.
first 2 books actually in December, but one's a journal and one's a devotional. And I only wrote one chapter in the devotional. But it was like dealing with Amazon was such a headache. And so kudos to you for writing so many books. I
Hmm.
mean, you probably dealt with actual publishers, but that's amazing. Okay, so what was there like a story or a situation that put this on your heart that you're like, I need to start blogging about this. I need to speak into this.
I think one of the big issues is that in evangelicalism, what we're often taught is that Jesus gave his life for you. And so you need to be prepared to sacrifice everything. And you need to realize that your reward is in heaven, and you need to give up your expectations of fulfillment on earth and don't make things idols and just really love Jesus. And there's truth to that, right?
Yeah.
There's truth to that. But that's not the whole truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes that becomes the only thing we're told when it comes to marriage.
Yeah.
And so when things are hard, when things aren't going well, you think, well, this is just what marriage is. this is just how I get to show love to my husband by living through this suffering. And we're not given tools to actually figure out how to make marriage better. And
Yeah.
why not? Like, God doesn't want you miserable till you die.
Yes.
We don't need to just be satisfying in a marriage that we hate.
Mm-hmm.
We're allowed to want to grow a marriage that you love.
Oh my gosh, I needed your content 20 years ago. That's amazing. But I love that you're saying that. I'm talking a little freely on here because we've talked about this a little bit from time to time. I've shared pieces of my story, but it's true. And the danger of not having the whole truth can make all the difference between the salvation message is good news and really bad news. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So was there like a situation that you were like, I have to speak into this? Was there a story?
Yeah, well, um,
Nervous laugh.
so I had been writing in the evangelical space for years. I had a very large blog. My first book, The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex, my first big one was out in 2012, and that was doing really well. I was really good friends with a lot of evangelical marriage authors, but one thing that I really hadn't done was read other evangelical books because I didn't want to plagiarize. So I'm in this space. I'm going on Focus on the Family. I'm doing all of these wonderful things, but I hadn't read what other people were saying.
Uh-huh.
And then in 2019, I did. I sat down, I had a migraine and I was procrastinating, a bad headache, and I was on Twitter, as it was called then, and people were having a debate as to whether they needed love or respect. And they were referring to the book Love and Respect.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I have that book. This is a great way to procrastinate. So I got it and I read it, and it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my living room because I realized for the first time what was being taught and how it was only part of a message, and it was really leaving out what was going on in women's hearts and women's lives. And I thought,
Yeah.
we need to do better than this. We need to do
Mm.
better than this. And that's what changed the whole focus of what, because I stopped just writing books based on, my opinion, the Bible, and what I was reading in peer-reviewed literature. And we started doing our own surveys. And so we've
Mm.
done the largest studies of evangelical women's marital and sexual satisfaction that have ever been done.
Wow.
So
That's
yeah, yeah.
incredible. Okay,
Mhm.
I had Shanti Feldham on the show as well. She writes
Yeah,
for
for
him
women
only.
only, for women only.
Thank
Mhm.
you. I had her on the show.
Mhm.
I should know what her book is called. And
Yeah.
so I love research-based content. So tell me
Mhm.
before I dive into our pre-scheduled conversation pieces, what was one of the most shocking things that you came across in the research that maybe validated your sense of we're not being told the whole truth?
Well, okay, and I know this, we're not mostly talking about sex in this podcast, but I'm going to give you a sex one,
Go
okay?
ahead.
Just
Go ahead.
because this is really easy. So evangelical women suffer from sexual pain disorders at 2.5 times the rate of the general population.
What does that even mean?
It's when the muscles of the vaginal wall contract, so they become really tight,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes like inserting a tampon very painful. The sex, like penetration, is impossible because you're just literally too tight.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's possible, but it's very painful. And
Mm.
23% of evangelical women suffer from this,
Oh no.
7% to the point that penetration is impossible. And we wanted to know why. Why is it so much higher among evangelical women? And so we figured that out. And it's because of some of the stuff we're taught.
Yeah.
And let me give you an example of a teaching that leads to that. And it's the idea that a wife is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it.
Mm-hmm.
So if a woman gets married believing that, her chance of experiencing sexual pain increases to pretty much the same extent as if she'd been abused,
Wow.
because our bodies interpret obligation as trauma.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. You might need to say that again for those who are listening, because I feel like you're dropping bombs on what people are experiencing.
Yeah,
So
so
go
our
ahead.
bodies literally interpret obligation as trauma because God said in Genesis 4, Adam knew his wife Eve,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that sounds funny to us, like God's embarrassed of saying the real word. But actually, the word there, the Hebrew word, is like this deep knowing, this deep intimacy. So
Mm.
sex is supposed to be about knowing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when obligation comes into it, it's saying it doesn't matter what you think. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you feel. You
Yeah.
don't matter. He has the right to use you however he wants.
Mm-mm.
And as soon as that comes in, even if your husband doesn't believe it, even if he's not the one giving you this message, if you've internalized it because we've
Mm-hmm.
been taught this, so like the majority of our marriage books teach this,
Mm-hmm.
then our bodies can respond to that as trauma.
Wow. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I had some very messed up ideas about
Mhm.
like women in marriage and our role. Like I believed submission looked like I could never tell him no, which was so
Mhm.
messed up. Why don't you talk to us about the role of
Yeah.
boundaries in the context of what you just shared?
Yeah. When we got married, our pastor drew a triangle in our premarital counseling, with God at the top and Keith and me at the bottom. And he
Mhm.
said, the more you move towards God, the more you're going to move towards each other. And it's a beautiful picture, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that triangle can get really distorted in a number of different ways. And one
Mhm.
of the ways that I often see it distorted in evangelicalism is that we start focusing on one spouse at the expense of the other. Because what that
Mm,
triangle tells you is that all three corners matter.
yeah,
But if we start feeling that only one corner matters or only two corners matter and we don't matter, our marriage is not going to thrive.
yeah,
Like if marriage is about truly knowing each other, then you need to show up in everything you are, in who God made you, in your personality, in your opinions, in your experiences, in your circumstances. You get to show up in everything that you are, and
yeah.
your spouse gets to show up in everything that he is. And then together that makes this beautiful picture.
Mm,
But if we have to go invisible, if we like, well, if I make any of my needs known, he's upset at me,
mhm.
or if I speak up, I'm somehow being disrespectful, then we kind of shrink. And that's not about knowing each other. That's not going to build intimacy or oneness.
Yeah.
And it's going to lead to some really, really dangerous problems down the road.
Okay, so we'll get into the solution there in a little bit. So talk to me, what are some of the most common beliefs that you found that women were believing, evangelical women, that
Hmm.
were creating this, as you said earlier, complicated marriage? Like you're wanting to
Hmm.
simplify marriage. You told me that it doesn't need to be as complicated as we've made
Hmm.
it. I have found that truth becomes dangerous when it goes into either extreme, right?
Hmm.
Like Ecclesiastes says, the man of God avoids all extremes. And so there's something that becomes unhealthy when we take a truth that God has taught that goes into one extreme or the other, because
Hmm.
wisdom's always in the middle because it requires discernment to live in the middle. And so what are some of the beliefs that you learned, that you saw, that were rooted in truth but that became really unhealthy, that evangelical women have had to work through?
Yeah, well, basically, anytime your opinion doesn't matter, bad things happen.
Yeah.
You each get to show up and matter. And let me give you an example. Okay. So in our survey of the latest survey, we had 1,300 matched pair couples, which is really cool because what that means is that both people in the marriage took the survey, but they didn't know what each other said, but we were able to match them up. So now if the husband says he does this, we can see what happens to the wife's responses,
Oh, cool.
right? So we can compare them. So we had 1,300 couples like that, plus another 5,000 individuals who took our latest survey for the marriage you want. And what we found over and over again is that there's all kinds of really good outcomes that you want in marriage, right? Like things like we have shared hobbies. I
Uh-huh.
feel like I can share my weaknesses with my spouse. When I'm excited about something, I want to tell my spouse first.
Mhm.
I love spending time with my spouse. We do things together every day. We pray together. Um, he doesn't have angry outbursts, like all these happy things, right?
Uh-huh.
Happy things, good things that we all want. We enjoy sex. Sex is great. All of these happy things, they tend to travel together.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like if one thing gets better, they all get better. Maybe not equally.
Mhm.
Some things might get a lot better and some things might just get a little better, but they tend to travel in the same direction. So
Mm.
picture two groups of people and they're hiking.
Mhm.
Okay. And one of them is wearing all purple t-shirts and one of them is wearing all green t-shirts. And the green t-shirts are going in one direction and the purple t-shirts are going in the other direction.
Mhm.
So your purple t-shirts are all the good outcomes. They're all traveling together. And
Uh-huh.
the green t-shirts are all the bad outcomes. They're all traveling together. All right. Now, the bad outcomes don't travel with the good outcomes. Like you can't have one thing that has both bad and good outcomes. All right. If something is going to cause good outcomes, it's going to pretty much only cause good outcomes.
Can you give an example? My brain's getting lost.
Yeah. So let's say that you look at praying together as a couple. All
Mhm.
right. So if you're going to pray together as a couple, that's going to be associated with all kinds of good things. It's not going to be associated with some good things and some bad things. It's like if something is good, if it does good in your marriage, then it's associated with all these good things,
Mhm.
not bad things. Now, here's where things get interesting. When you look at things like who makes decisions in your marriage, making decisions together is associated with all good things.
Mhm.
But as soon as the husband makes the decision, it's all bad things. So as soon as he makes the decision, even if he consults with his wife first, if you're in a marriage where the husband makes the final decision,
Hmm.
you're in all bad things.
Really? Because I feel like that stems from the belief of the man is the head of the home and,
Yeah.
a woman is to submit to her husband. And that's where it's kind of come down to. It's like, well, if there's a disagreement, he has the
Hmm.
final word, which we've definitely done that many, many times. And I don't know that I have a negative experience with it for the most
Well,
part.
it's not that you just have a negative. You just don't have as good as you could.
Ah. So what's the
It's
what's
like
the good
it
alternative? Doing it
is to
together.
make decisions together. And the vast, vast majority of couples do that. About 78.9% of couples make decisions together. They don't get, like,
Yeah.
we've been married 33 years. We've never needed a tie-breaking vote.
Oh, gotcha. Wow.
And the reason is actually
Hmm.
because of the fundamental belief. Let's say that
Hmm.
you get married believing that we're going to be able to make decisions together.
Hmm.
Then when you disagree, what do? You're like, oh, we got to figure this out. So let's
Hmm.
pray together. Let's talk to other people. Let's
Hmm.
wait on it. Or maybe it's something that just matters a whole lot more to me than it does to you. So let's just let me have this one. Or if you know more about cars than I do and we're trying to decide what car to buy,
Yeah.
then you know what? I'm going to give this one to you. Like, so you
So
just look at the circumstances.
So that's not what you're talking about as far as letting someone make the
Yeah,
decisions.
it's
That's
when
a
he
difference.
always makes the decision because he is the man, as opposed to like,
Mm,
okay, we're gonna make the decision together. It's like, yeah, you know what? You probably know more about this one, so I'm gonna give
okay.
this one to you, and it goes back and forth. Okay.
Gotcha.
But if you get married thinking, well, when we have a decision, if we just can't agree, then he makes the decision, what we
Hmm.
find is that short circuits intimacy
That
with
makes sense.
couples because
Yeah.
you get into a disagreement and instead of necessarily doing the work, you're like, well, I guess this is one of those times where he has to make the decision.
Yeah. That makes
And when
sense.
that happens, that tends to have negative outcomes on pretty much everything.
Because it makes the other spouse feel voiceless.
Yeah. hmm
Gotcha. Wow. Okay. So what's another one? What's another one that us Christian women wrongly believed?
a big one, what we see over and over again is just how you do life.
Mm,
Like, how do you divide up mental load? How do you divide up? That's a huge one. Like, we think the two biggest problems in marriage are sex and money. They're not by a long shot.
what is it?
So let me give you an example.
Uh-huh.
We measured marital satisfaction on a scale of 0 to 100.
Hmm.
Okay, so 100's good, 0's bad. And most people are like around the 80 and they don't move very much. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
on the whole, people are pretty happy. All right.
Uh-huh.
When you go from having sex once a month to having sex several times a week, you increase marital satisfaction by about 10 points.
Hmm.
All right. I'm not saying that sex will cause you to have a happier marriage. It's just the kind of marriage that has sex more often tends to be happier. I'm
Right.
going to put a big caveat in there. Sex doesn't actually
Pay for
fix anything. The question is, why does she not want sex? That's a much more important question.
it. Yeah.
But let's put a pin in that. Let's
Yeah.
just say, okay, so that's a 10-point difference.
Uh-huh.
Having money problems in marriage, that's a 5-point difference.
Mm.
Okay, so that impacts marital satisfaction by 5 points.
Hmm.
If you if you look at couples where she does 90% of the housework
Hmm.
versus couples where she does 50% of the housework, you have a 30-point change.
Oh, wow.
So so couples where, mental load and housework is split
Hmm.
compared to couples where she does 90%, 30-point change. And that's when you look at all couples. When you look at just couples who work outside the home, where they both work outside the home, the drop is even greater.
Wow. Okay, so what I hear you saying in that stat though is essentially happy wife, happy life. Because if it's depend, which I'm imagining it's flipped too. Like if for some reason the husband is doing the majority of the housework.
Yes, yes, he also falls. It
Okay,
also
okay.
falls.
Okay, so
hmm
really it's about like what you just said, mental load, which define that term because if any of my listeners don't know what that means, it's kind of a trendy term right now.
hmm
But if I said it to my husband, I don't know if he would really understand what I'm
hmm
talking about as a woman.
Okay, let me give you an example. Can I give you a story about
Please.
mental load?
Yes.
All right, it's a Friday night in the summer,
Hmm.
and Greg turns to Tammy and says, "Hey, let's go to the beach tomorrow. It'll be fun. We haven't done anything fun as a family. The kids will love it." And Tammy gets a panicked look on her face and goes, "Okay, we'll go to the beach tomorrow." And, Greg pulls a couple of backpacks, shoves some towels in there and some bathing suits, and he thinks they're ready. And Tammy is just running around like a chicken with her head cut off.
Mhm.
She is making food. She is rifling through the Christmas decorations. And he's like, "Why are you going into the Christmas decorations?" And she's like, "I know the noodles are in here. I know that all of the pails and the shovels are in here, but I don't know where they are." And then she remembers that the baby is going to need some sort of a suntan, and she lent it out to Eileen 2 weeks ago, and so she's like, "How am I going to get it back? I got to call Eileen." But if we're going to put all the stuff to the beach into the car, in the trunk of the car right now is all the stuff I was going to take to Goodwill, and so I need to see if the thrift store is open right now, or maybe we need to take it out of the trunk of the car and put it in the garage so that we can put all the beach stuff in there. And oh my gosh, our daughter needs 100 SPF sunscreen on her face because she burns so easily, and I don't know if we have enough, so I probably should go to the drugstore too to get that 100 SPF sunscreen. And oh man, my period is starting tomorrow, and I don't know if I have a proper wrap, and is there a place to change tampons, and I don't know. So now this is what's going through her head.
Yes, exactly.
He thinks she looks insane.
Yes.
Right?
He's
He
like,
thinks
"What's wrong
she's
with
going,
you, woman? It's so hard to
yeah.
make you happy."
It's like, we are going to the beach. I want to have a good time with you, and you are making far too big a deal out of this. But is she? Right? Her daughter needs SPF 100 sunscreen. They need to bring food. If they don't bring food, it's going to cost them a ton of money.
Yeah.
They do need a place to put all their beach stuff, which means you do need to figure out what's going on in the car. Like, all of these
Yeah.
things actually come into the story. And the problem is, with most of these things, the woman is carrying it and not the husband. And that just
Yes.
weighs on you.
Mhm.
It weighs on you.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. I feel like I know people in my life who this is their most common complaint in their relationship because the husband works and he might cook, but he'll go home
Mhm.
and he just stays in the garage. And she
Mhm.
has to do everything with the kids. If they do, I can remember times when my kids were really little and, everything is very high maintenance when they're little. And my husband would be like, "Let's go on a date night. How about you? Can you find us a babysitter? We'll go on a date tonight." And I said, I went from excited to
Mhm.
never mind, cancel the date. I'm not interested. Because the thought of having to prepare everything and
Yes.
find a babysitter was so stressful. I'm like, let's just stay in and watch a movie after they go to bed. Like, I am not
Mhm.
interested in going through all of that. And that's the mental load.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's it.
So how do you tell people to recognize this slash deal with this?
And we have a lot of stuff in the book about how to do this. We have a whole chapter, actually two, on just noticing what's going on, and we give different strategies for how to
Uh-huh.
divide up things. How everyone just needs to own their own thing. Like, maybe he owns hockey practice. I'm Canadian. We go to hockey, right? So maybe he owns hockey practice, and that doesn't just involve driving little Johnny to the rink and then driving little Johnny home. It also involves making sure that his uniform or his is it uniform in hockey? I don't even know.
Yeah.
His whatever it is
Jersey. Yeah.
yes, his whatever it is clean, making sure his skates fit. When it's their turn to bring the snack, that he does that, and then he makes sure that they get the Tupperware container back. If they're going to carpool, he's going to organize that. If there's fundraising for the hockey team, he's going to organize the fundraising and ask grandma and grandpa for money and the neighbors, right? Like, it isn't just driving, it's all of this other stuff. And
Mhm.
if he owns all of hockey, then she doesn't have to worry about the snack, Tupperware, and about the fundraising. Like, she
Yeah.
knows, I don't have to think about that.
Yeah.
And that just frees her up to feel a lot lighter. And so
Yeah.
when you just own different things, like, maybe he can completely own homework, you know,
Uh-huh.
or whatever it might be. But when you own different aspects so that you own the entire thing, that
Uh-huh.
is so much healthier.
That makes sense. I feel like men's brains don't automatically go to all those things though. I feel like they just think very like point A to point B and it's women who pull in all the things. So how do you train a man to acknowledge all that? Is it write lists? Just make checklists?
Actually, making a list means that you still own it.
Fair.
Right? If you
That's
have
fair.
to make a list and give it to him, you still own it. The whole point is that he has to adopt it and not need a list, that
Uh-huh.
he has to count on. But you used a word there that was important. You said train.
Uh-huh.
How do you train a man? What you need to remember is that women have been trained too. We do not naturally do this.
Mm,
That's a big misconception. Women are not better multitaskers than men. They've done experiments on this where they put both men and women in completely like new situations where women have never been in before,
uh-huh.
and where some multitasking is involved, and women perform just as badly as men do. We are equally bad at multitasking. The difference is women have more practice.
Okay, wait, but hold on. From what I know of how our brains work, my
Mhm.
brain can consider six things at the same time while he's living in his one little box. So I feel like our
Again,
brains,
it's actually not true. Neuroscience has disproven that over the last 10 years.
Okay,
It's
now
just
you're
that women do this more often, and we don't have the luxury. Like that whole idea of the nothing brain,
hmm
it's because women don't have the luxury of nothing brain.
Yeah, we don't. But I don't even go there. Even if I wanted to, I don't go there.
Yeah,
Like I
but
can't
men,
even force myself to.
right. No, I know, I know. And this is the thing is that it's because the mental load is so unevenly distributed. Because if women are constantly carrying all of this stuff ourselves,
Uh-huh.
it is exhausting, but we are not naturally better at it.
I don't
A huge
I'm
Harvard study came out.
struggling with that because
Yeah.
like if this is so
Mhm.
common among women and it's so common among men, are our lives really that different that it trains us universally? Like,
Yes. Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like
I
I'm
have we
struggling with
have
that one.
we in the marriage you want we link to all the peer-reviewed studies that show this about we talk about this about all the multitasking studies and
Uh-huh.
everything. But yes, yeah, women are
Wow.
equally bad at it. We're all bad at it. It's just when you have to make dinner and the kids need the homework done and the science fair project is due tomorrow
hmm
and you've got to shovel the driveway because you got to get out. You're thinking about all of these things at the same time
Yeah.
because you are the one that is responsible for all of them. If some of those things were not on your plate, if they were on his, he would. And newborns. If you look at families with newborns, when the father is just as involved with the baby as the mother is,
Uh-huh.
he has the same hormonal changes as she does.
Wow.
Yeah, like he like when you bond with the baby as a newborn, you start naturally doing all this multitasking stuff too.
hmm
So it really is the way that we've set up our lives. And it
Wow,
leads to
that's
a lot of discontent in women. We call it the unfairness threshold. So if you look in the first 3 to 5 years of marriage and you look at women who do more than 75% of housework and you
mhm.
ask them, does my husband do his fair share? Like, does your husband do his fair share of housework? And the women tend to say, yeah. Like, we looked at the women who said yes. And that amount drops significantly over the next 20 years until
Mhm.
you get women who are very, very upset. So it's
Really.
like you can put up with something and say it's not that bad in the
Mhm.
first few years of marriage, but it drastically drops. And that's true with sex as well. Like you
Uh-huh.
can put up with not having an orgasm for the first few years,
Uh-huh.
but after 20 years, she's like, no, I'm done.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes sense. And actually, what contributes to that, I don't know if you know this or maybe you found this in your research, is a friend who's a therapist told me that women, when we're around, it's either 30 or 35, there's a hormone cocktail in our brain that is there until about that age that allows us to suppress our needs so that we
Mhm,
can nurture and tend and care for
mhm,
little children. But once we
mhm,
hit 30, 35, which, maybe 35, typically women are stopping having children or whatever, not now, but used to be. And so around that time, that hormone cocktail starts to diminish. And so
mhm,
suddenly she becomes aware of all of her needs that have been neglected or suppressed or looked over.
mhm,
And suddenly she becomes very discontent with the circumstances as it were. And I
mhm,
was like, oh, I can relate to that timeline. Like my life, I got way less
mhm.
gracious after about 30. I was like, why am I still suffering, or whatever.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that makes sense that after a while that her ability to just deal with it would tank as well.
Yeah, and that's what we find. Like we saw this in so many different measures, is that women's marital satisfaction really drops off when things are not fair in a number of ways. And we're told so much in the church that we shouldn't be looking for fairness. We should be looking to just sacrifice and give as Christ gave and not think of ourselves. But the truth is, when you're in a marriage, you're supposed to be loved and cherished.
Yeah.
You're supposed to matter. And while you can put up with that for a while, you can't put up with it long term. Not and keep your own sanity and keep yourself. Because we end up gaslighting ourselves that it isn't that bad.
hmm
We tell ourselves that, well, God's enough for me. And it's like God can be enough for you, and you can still want your marriage to be good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those don't have to be two polar opposites.
So what about on the mental load thing? There have been times that my husband, when he was really stressed about finances, because he's the primary, breadwinner,
Hmm.
if you want to use that phrase, that when he was really stressed about finances, he would come at me and either try to put bills on me or tell me to go get a job tomorrow, or whatever. And he would
Hmm.
just take that stress out. How much does that mental load affect? Like, where's the mental load for men? Because if men are the primary breadwinner, I know that's like a constant pressure and stress that they feel on a regular basis because of their drive to provide. And I've heard my husband use the phrase of I'm alone in this, or he feels like he carries it alone. And Shanti Feldham
Mhm.
actually in her book talks about how men have this sense of aloneness in their need
Mhm.
to provide, but they kind of like it that way somehow. And so how does the mental load thing show up with the providing? Because then, I mean, you also said that households where two are working have a
Mhm.
less happiness satisfaction. But if that mental load needs to be shared, then that would imply women maybe should be working. So help me unravel that a little bit.
Yeah, so households where both are working don't have lower marital satisfaction. They only do if she is still doing the 90% of the housework. So if
Oh,
she's doing
gotcha.
90% while they're both working, that is very bad.
Oh, yeah,
Very, very,
yeah.
very, very, very bad.
Yeah.
Um, and I just want to say too that in many couples today, she also does a whole lot of the providing,
Hmm.
and she might even make more money than him.
Hmm.
And that doesn't seem to affect marital satisfaction. Like it really doesn't matter. What we found is that it really doesn't matter who makes the most income. What matters is, do you both feel seen? Do you both feel appreciated for what you're doing?
Hmm.
And when there's a really big disconnect, when he's doing way more or she's doing way more, that's when you see marital satisfaction fall. And I think people often think, well, because he works outside the home, she gets to take care of all the housework. That's not actually true, because housework is 24/7 and
Hmm.
childcare is 24/7, and childcare is not a chore. Children are a relationship
Yeah.
and they need their father. I saw an Instagram post recently where a woman said, my husband works so hard for us. And so I am happy to look after our daughter and he will never have to change a diaper.
Oh,
It's like your daughter needs your husband to change a diaper.
yeah, she does.
Your daughter needs her father. And so we need to get away from this idea that because he works outside the home, he shouldn't have to work inside of it.
Mm.
Because you know what? The most stressed people are stay-at-home moms.
Mm.
And studies have repeatedly found is this that the most stressful job is being a stay-at-home mom with kids, because you don't have
Yeah.
adults to talk to. And
Yeah.
there's no immediate gratification for what you do.
Yeah.
No one's patting you on the back saying, wow, you washed that pot really well. And so it is a very, very difficult job. And I think there has to be some acknowledgement of that. One of
Mhm.
the best ways to see whether or not, you guys are treating each other fairly is downtime.
Mm.
So who has the time to just sit down and do nothing? And if
Yeah.
one of you has significantly more time to sit down and do nothing, that's a sign that your marriage might be imbalanced.
Mm.
And it
That
could
makes
be that
sense.
you're a stay-at-home mom, but you spend like all afternoon sitting down and doing nothing. And then, yeah, it's totally fair for you to take on more stuff at night. But if you're working really hard all day and then he comes home and he sits down and does nothing while you
Mhm.
continue to work hard, that is going to breed resentment. And it
Yeah.
isn't good for either of you. And
Yeah.
certainly not good for your kids to see either.
Yeah, that's true. There was a season in our life where I remember anytime I would hear the garage go up, like my husband was home, I would
Hmm.
immediately jump up if I was sitting down. It was like the first time I'd sat down all
Hmm.
day, but if I was sitting down when he got home, I immediately would jump up and run to go do a chore so that when he came home, he saw me working, which is
Yeah.
really unhealthy. And as
Yeah.
as our
Hmm.
marriage progressed, I got out of that, and he learned to respond because he would give me a hard time if he saw me sitting and the house was
Hmm.
in any way a mess. And anyways, and so we had to learn through that, and he had to learn, like, hey, messes are constant when you have children, period, no matter how hard you work. And some of how I think he learned that was I would go once a year on a 2-week trip to go be with my sisters who live out of state, and because he would go on missions trips all year long. And so I was like, I think I earned my trip to go see my sisters. And so during those 2 weeks, he had to tend to everything. And I think that was a very good perspective giving
Yeah.
time that
Hmm.
allowed him to see, oh, the mess just never ends. And so I can't be so hard on her.
Yeah. And that's what you call being an understudy. We talk about that in chapter 6 of our book too, is how important it is to be each other's understudies
Uh,
so that you can show up and so that your spouse knows, hey, if I'm not here, things are not going to fall apart. And that's true for paid work as well. If you're a stay-at-home spouse and your husband's making most of the money, knowing that, okay, if he gets ill, if he has to go back to school and retrain, if he loses his job, there is something that I can do to make money, even if it's
mhm.
not as much. That's an important thing too, just to lower the stress of the household.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Okay, so help us. I know, I feel like I could ask you all these questions about your content now because I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Okay, so how can people reclaim balance? So I know I mean, you're kind of essentially poking holes in traditional gender roles, really,
Hmm.
because that's, I think, what lends us to, which I think the gender roles are there naturally as well. Women are more naturally nurturers. We see the things that our kids need differently. Like I can ask my husband, okay, so what did the kids eat while I was gone all afternoon? He's like, oh, they snacked on some chips, and they, I don't know, had some chocolate, and he's like, has
Hmm.
no awareness of like nutrition and protein, and they need to eat real food. But as the nurturer, my brain immediately goes through all those things. Whereas the flip side, if there's things around money or around taking care of the house, my husband just is on mission. Like he just thinks of the things I don't think about, and
Hmm.
that may be because we've been in these particular roles for so long, but even earlier in our relationship, he just thought of things that I just didn't think about. And so I think that their need to provide and protect and our need to nurture and cultivate relationship and keep the family in connection, I think those lend us towards our gender roles. And so how do you speak to gender roles and all of that?
Well, let me talk about how we can actually get each other's needs met, because I think that's one of the big problems, right? Is that you feel like this is what I need in the marriage. And he's like, well, this is what I need in the marriage. And so, well, I guess if we're going to be happy, then we each have to give each other what they need,
Mhm.
right? And so marriage becomes this transactional thing. I'll give you what you need, you give me what I need. And when we see things in terms of gender, he needs sex or whatever it might be, and she needs emotional support or whatever it might be. And I want to ask us to take a step back and say, all right, instead of asking what does he need and what does she need, let's ask what does the marriage need?
Mm.
Because that's a different question. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's take a couple, and we called them Gabriella and Brad in our book. But
Mm.
okay, so Gabriella and Brad, 3 kids, married for 10 years. Gabriella is a nurse, and she does often really weird, wonky shifts, like night shifts. And so she's often really, really sleepy and tired because she's also taking care of most of the housework.
Mm.
And she found out 6 months ago that Brad had a porn problem that had been
Mm.
going on since before they got married. And she found it on his computer. He didn't confess it. She found it,
Mm.
and she was devastated. And he wasn't really going to go get any help, but he just promised her that he wasn't going to watch porn anymore. But she hadn't seen a lot of changes in him.
Yeah.
And so she just was not having sex because she was just done and she was exhausted.
Yeah.
And so Brad took her to the pastor and said, "We've got to fix this because my wife isn't having sex with me." And the pastor turned to Gabriella and listened to their story and said, "Okay, Gabriella, you need to have sex with your husband, and Brad, you need to start looking after your kids more." Okay? So that's the good compromise, right? So they each get what they want. The problem is compromise only works if you're starting on an even playing field. And so what we invite people to do is think of a marriage hierarchy of needs, kind of like in psychology, you learned about the hierarchy of needs that Abraham Maslow did, where you got your basic needs on the bottom of this pyramid, like food and shelter and air and safety. And then you get, friendship and having fun, and then you get self-actualization. You get all these different, as you get needs met, then you're able to meet some of the higher needs.
Mm.
And no one's worried about having sex, for instance, when you're getting chased by a bear, right?
Right.
Like safety is number one. And the same is true in marriage. So think of the marriage hierarchy as having 3 different stages. So you have the surviving tier at the very bottom, where you are only focused on getting through the day. You're focused on getting rent money. You're focused on making sure the kids have food. You're focused on making sure the homework is done and the laundry is done, but you're barely surviving. Like everything is just a slog. You're not really enjoying yourself. It's just hard right now.
Mhm.
And then you get to the living portion where, okay, there's some breathing room. We can work at finding a church we like. We can work at our relationship. We can try to have some fun together. And we can try to work on sex a little bit more. And then you get into thriving, where you feel like I am living at the calling that God has for me. We're just really growing in intimacy. Our lives mean so much to us.
Mhm.
And what happens in a lot of marriages is that one person is in that living or thriving category where they're doing really well,
Mm.
but they're doing it at the expense of their spouse, who they're pushing down to the surviving category.
Mm.
And I've seen this happen. I have friends who, for instance, they feel really called to homeschool their kids.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I homeschooled my girls all the way through. I'm a big homeschooling advocate. But, they're buying all the expensive curriculum. They're sending their kids to these expensive homeschooling co-ops. And at the same time, their husband is really struggling to make ends meet, and there just isn't enough money. And so she is doing something which she feels called by God to do. And she's like, you are by critiquing my choices, you are not believing in God's calling on our lives. You don't have enough faith. So she's upset at him for not having enough faith. But at the same time, he's like, our bills are not getting paid. We can't afford a down payment on a house. We're just renting. This is not good.
Mm-hmm.
And so her dreams are pushing him down to the surviving tier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they have to have a bigger conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we turn back to Gabriella and Brad, Gabriella is living on that survival tier. She is exhausted. She is just trying to get her kids out the door in the morning. She is just trying to get food on the table, and she is feeling betrayed and hurt by Brad.
Yeah.
And Brad is trying to get the benefits of higher tiers without ever participating in that lower tier.
Makes sense.
And so what I'm saying is, hey, people, let's get together and let's figure out what tier each of you is on, because your
Yeah.
marriage is on the lowest tier that one of you occupies.
Wow.
So if you're having a great time, but your spouse is surviving, your marriage is on that surviving tier. It is not on the thriving tier. And so it's up to you to jump into that lower tier with your spouse
Mm-hmm.
and work with your spouse so that together you can get onto a higher tier.
That's so good. That's so good. So I'm going to assume that your book, because I want to talk about your book here, I'm assuming that your book dives into like what are some of the red flags that would indicate which tier you're living in and how to come together to move upward together, right?
Yes, exactly. So we have really practical things on how to share mental load, really practical things on just how to enjoy spending time together,
Uh-huh.
how to find more time to spend together, how to make it more of a routine in your daily life so that you can talk about this stuff. Because that's part of the problem is we don't have time just to talk and have fun together and bring the
Yeah.
tension level down so that we can say, hey, you know what? I am really struggling. I am struggling in this area and I could really use your help. And we have a lot of stuff on how to learn to speak emotional language, right? Like, because we're not going to feel intimate unless I know what you're feeling and unless you make it safe for me to tell you what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But in order to do that, I need to understand what I'm feeling. I need to be able to articulate it. A lot of us can't do that. And so
Yeah.
that's a big break from intimacy. So let's work through how to talk emotional language, how to figure out what
Yeah.
we're feeling, and how to make it safe for our spouse to tell us too.
That's so good. And so how would you say, summarizing, because one of your main talking points was you feel like we make marriage more complicated than it needs to be. If you were to
Mhm.
simplify how to simplify marriage, what does it need to be? How do you make it simple and less complicated?
Love your neighbor as yourself. And that means you get to love two people, right? Because if you're going to love your neighbor, love
You
your
have to love
spouse, but
yourself.
love your spouse as yourself, which means you
Mhm.
get to love yourself too. You
Yeah,
both need to show up.
that's
You
so
need
good.
to leave room for your spouse to show up, but you need to leave room for you to show up too.
That's so
And when
good.
you love your neighbor as yourself and you keep God at the center of that triangle, things are going to go really well.
Yeah.
But when you distort one of those things, any one of those sides of that triangle, your marriage isn't going to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Okay, so where can people find your book? Because obviously, I feel like you tackle some things that are not commonly talked about or commonly given attention to. And the idea of sharing mental load is so important. And this is something that's becoming more of a forefront conversation piece. And if
Mhm.
if the research that you guys did indicated like this is the major contributor to a happy or an unhappy relationship, it's pretty important. So where can people find your book?
So The Marriage You Want, it's out now. It just launched. And you can find me at baremarriage.com. And there's links to all of our books, Great Sex Rescue, our first one, and then The Marriage You Want. And we're everywhere. Our Bare Marriage podcast is every Thursday, and we talk about the marriage you want on there as well.
Oh, so good. Awesome. Well, Sheila, our hour went so quickly. Thank you so much for answering all these questions and sharing your heart and what you're doing. Thank you for putting the hard work into not just your book, but your ministry and the way you're ministering to couples because it's important. It's important. It's so It's so hard when you're in a marriage that you don't know how to make it better and you just need a lifeline, and you're giving people a lifeline. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And you guys make sure and go get that book. Whether you get it for yourself or maybe you even get it for a friend of yours who, you know that their marriage is difficult and they just need something to work through, something tangible that they can bring into application in their relationship. Get it as a gift, but go to baremarriage.com and I'm imagining it's on Amazon as well if they want to find it
It's
there.
everywhere you'd buy books, wherever.
It's everywhere. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share with my listeners. It's so good. And you guys, thanks so much for listening at Java with Jen. Make sure you share this episode with someone. We talk about this all the time, but I don't know about you guys. There have been times in my life where someone sent me a podcast episode and it literally spoke right into the heart of what I was dealing with and changed my life. So you guys don't even realize how impactful it can be when you share these episodes with people. So send this to a few friends that may be top of mind at the moment and get this in their hands. And otherwise, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any upcoming episodes here at Java with Jen. We'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.